Maya Chen wasn't nervous when she walked through the glass doors of Riverside Conservatory that Tuesday morning. She'd been nervous weeks ago when she hit the submit button on her audition application. She'd been nervous when the acceptance email arrived, confirming her slot. But now, standing in the marble lobby with her brother's old jacket and her backpack that had seen better days, she felt something else entirely. Determination, maybe, or just the quiet knowledge that she'd earned her place here, even if nobody else knew it yet. The lobby looked like something out of a movie. High ceilings with crystal chandeliers, walls lined with portraits of famous musicians, and a grand staircase that curved upward like something from a palace. Everywhere she looked, there were kids her age, maybe a bit older, all dressed like they were heading to a concert instead of an audition. Designer clothes, leather instrument cases, parents who looked like they'd stepped out of magazine ads. Maya adjusted her backpack straps and joined the line at the registration desk. She couldn't help but notice the differences. The girl in front of her had a piano-shaped pendant that looked like real gold. The boy behind her was talking on his phone about his recent performance at some hall in Europe. Everyone seemed to know each other, hugging and squealing about summer programs and master classes. Maya had spent her summer working double shifts at her aunt's restaurant, saving every dollar for the keyboard she practiced on at home. Different worlds, she thought, but the same music. When it was finally her turn at the desk, the woman behind the counter barely looked up. She was older, maybe 50, with reading glasses on a chain and perfectly styled gray hair. Maya smiled and started to explain why she was there, but the woman cut her off. "Honey, if you're looking for someone, the visitor entrance is around the side." She said it kindly enough, but there was an assumption in her voice that made Maya's stomach tighten. An assumption that she couldn't possibly be here to audition. Maya pulled out her phone. The screen cracked from when she dropped it last month. "I'm here for the audition. I have a confirmation email." The woman's eyebrows went up like she'd just said something surprising. She took the phone, squinting at the screen, then scrolled through her tablet with one long fingernail. Click, click, click. Finally, she found Maya's name and made a little humming sound. "Oh, well, you're checked in then." There was a pause, and then she leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice like she was doing Maya a favor. "You should know, dear, that most of our students have been training here since they were very young. The standards are quite high. Walk-ins don't usually make it past the first round." Walk-ins. The word stung more than it should have. Maya thanked her and took her name tag, moving toward the waiting area before the woman could see her face flush. She wasn't a walk-in. She'd been playing piano since she was 6 years old, learning from her grandmother in Taiwan before they'd moved to the States. She'd practiced every single day for the past 11 years, even when it meant using the school's music room after hours, even when her neighbors complained about the noise from her digital keyboard, even when her guidance counselor suggested she focus on something more practical than music. The waiting area was a large room with velvet couches and tall windows overlooking a garden. Maya found an empty spot on a couch between two girls who were deep in conversation. They were talking about Vienna. Something about a summer-intensive program where they'd studied with some famous instructor, whose name Maya didn't recognize. One of them mentioned performing with a youth symphony. The other talked about the Steinway grand piano her parents had just bought for their lake house. Lake house piano. Maya tried to imagine having so much money that you could buy a grand piano for a house you only visited sometimes. She put in her headphones, not actually playing any music, just trying to create a bubble of space around herself. In her mind, she ran through the piece she'd chosen for today. Rachmaninoff's Prelude in G minor. It was ambitious, maybe even risky. Her high school music teacher had suggested something safer, something more technical and less emotional. But Maya had connected with this piece the first time she'd heard it. It felt like Rachmaninoff had somehow known what it was like to be far from home, to be underestimated, to carry something beautiful inside you that the world wasn't quite ready to see. She was so lost in her thoughts that she almost didn't notice when the girl next to her elbowed her friend and whispered something. But she caught it. "Look at her backpack. Do you think she's lost?" They both tried to hide their giggles behind their hands. Maya pretended not to hear, focusing on her breathing the way her grandmother had taught her. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Don't let them make you small. More students filtered into the waiting area. Each one seemed more polished than the last. There was a boy who looked about 18, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Maya's entire wardrobe. His parents were with him, both hovering and fussing over him like he was about to perform at Carnegie Hall instead of a conservatory audition. The father kept straightening the boy's tie while the mother applied lint roller to his jacket, with quick, precise movements. The boy sat down across from Maya, and she could feel him looking at her, sizing her up. He turned to his mother, not even bothering to lower his voice. "I don't understand why they let just anyone audition here. Most of the serious students have been working with Master Petrova or Professor Lin for years. This is supposed to be an elite program." His mother made a soft shushing sound, but she didn't disagree. She didn't even glance at Maya to see if she'd heard. Or maybe she did glance and simply didn't care. Maya felt that familiar fire starting to build in her chest. It was the same feeling she got whenever someone assumed she wasn't good enough because of how she looked or where she came from. The same feeling that had kept her practicing 4 hours a day after school while working weekends. The same feeling that had pushed her to apply to this place even though everyone said it was a long shot. She wanted to say something, to defend herself, but what would be the point? Let the piano do the talking, her grandmother used to say. Let the music speak. The afternoon dragged on. Through the heavy auditorium doors, Maya could hear fragments of performances. A Chopin nocturne, played with technical precision but somehow lacking soul. A Beethoven sonata that hit every note correctly but felt mechanical. These kids were good, no question. They'd had the best teachers, the best instruments, the best opportunities. But Maya knew something they might not.
Having everything handed to you doesn't always teach you how to reach for something with your whole heart. When they finally called her name, Maya stood up and gathered her things.
Her hands were steady. Her mind was clear. This was what she'd been preparing for. As she walked toward the auditorium doors, she heard a voice behind her. Sweet as honey, but sharp underneath. Good luck. It was the blonde girl from the couch, the one who'd been talking about Vienna. Though honestly, you don't really belong here. This isn't some community center recital. Maya stopped walking. Her hand was on the door handle, but she turned around slowly to face the girl. The entire waiting room had gone quiet. Parents looked up from their phones. Other students paused their conversations. Even the boy in the expensive suit stopped scrolling through his tablet. Maya looked at the girl, really looked at her, and saw something she recognized. Fear. This girl was afraid that maybe talent and hard work mattered more than money and connections. She was afraid that her advantages might not be enough. Maya's voice was calm when she spoke, but it carried across the silent room. You're right. I don't belong in a room full of people who think music is about the price of their instrument or whose name is on their diploma. The girl's face went red. Her friend looked down at her lap. Several parents shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Maya turned back toward the door, and that's when it opened from the inside. An elderly man stood in the doorway. He had white hair and deep lines around his eyes, the kind you get from smiling and squinting at sheet music for decades. His suit was rumpled, and there was something about him that felt different from everyone else here. Less polished, more real. He looked at Maya, then at the blonde girl, then back at Maya. "Miss Chen?" he asked, his accent thick and unmistakably Russian. "We are ready for you." Maya stepped forward, and as she passed him, the man addressed the waiting room in that same accented voice. "Music cares nothing for where you come from, only where you can take it." Then he closed the door behind them, and Maya found herself walking down the aisle of the auditorium, toward a piano that would change everything. The auditorium was smaller than Maya had imagined, but somehow that made it more intimidating, not less. Maybe 100 seats, all upholstered in dark red velvet. The ceiling stretched up high above them, with wood panels that looked like they'd been there for a century. Everything about this place whispered history and tradition and excellence. Everything about it said that people like her didn't usually make it through these doors. The elderly man who'd opened the door walked ahead of her down the center aisle. His shoes made soft clicking sounds on the polished floor. Maya followed, her worn sneakers silent in comparison. At the front of the auditorium, 3 people sat behind a long wooden table. They had papers spread out in front of them, pens in hand, faces that gave away nothing. This was it, the moment she'd been working toward for months. Years, really, if she was being honest. The man who'd escorted her in took his seat at the table with the other judges. That's when Maya realized who he must be. Professor Volkov. She'd read about him when researching the conservatory. One of the most respected piano teachers in the country, maybe in the world. He'd performed in concert halls across Europe before dedicating his life to teaching. And he'd just heard that girl tell Maya she didn't belong here. Heat crept up her neck, but she pushed the embarrassment down. Focus. This was about the music, nothing else. The woman in the center of the table spoke first. She was maybe 60, with silver hair pulled back in a bun and reading glasses perched on her nose. "Miss Chen, I'm Dean Hartwell. We're ready whenever you are." She gestured toward the front of the auditorium, and that's when Maya really saw it. The piano, a Steinway grand, its black surface reflecting the stage lights like still water. It was the most beautiful instrument she'd ever seen in person. For a second, she just stood there staring. She'd been practicing on a digital keyboard for 3 years now. Before that, she'd used the old upright at her high school, the one with the sticky middle C and the slightly out-of-tune F sharp. She'd learned the basics on her grandmother's piano back in Taiwan, an instrument that had probably been old when her grandmother was young. But this was something else entirely. This was the kind of piano she'd only seen in videos, heard in recordings. The kind that could bring out every subtle shade of emotion in a piece if you knew how to speak its language. Maya walked toward it slowly, almost reverently. She adjusted the bench, lowering it just slightly. The judges would notice that. They'd know immediately that she was used to a different setup, the kind you found on digital keyboards and cheaper uprights. Another mark against her, probably. Another sign that she wasn't one of them. But as her fingers touched the keys for the first time, something inside her shifted. The keys were smooth, responsive, alive under her hands. She'd dreamed about playing an instrument like this. She glanced back at the judges. Dean Hartwell nodded encouragingly. The third judge, a younger woman Maya didn't recognize, had her pen ready. Professor Volkov sat very still, his hands folded in front of him, his dark eyes unreadable. Maya turned back to the piano and closed her eyes for just a moment. In through the nose, out through the mouth. She thought about her grandmother, teaching her the first simple melodies in that tiny apartment in Taipei. She thought about her parents working double shifts so she could have that digital keyboard. She thought about every person who'd ever looked at her like she was wasting her time chasing an impossible dream. Then she began to play. The opening notes of Rachmaninoff's Prelude in G minor filled the auditorium. Dark, heavy, like a door opening into a room full of shadows. Her left hand laid down the foundation, those low, rumbling chords that felt like thunder in the distance. Her right hand sang the melody over top, each note precise but not cold, technical but not mechanical. She'd played this piece so many times that her fingers knew the path without thinking. But knowing the path and walking it with meaning were two different things. The piece demanded everything from her. Technical skill, yes. You couldn't fake your way through Rachmaninoff. The man had enormous hands and wrote music that stretched across the keyboard in ways that made smaller hands like hers work twice as hard. But more than technique, it demanded emotion. It demanded that you understood what it meant to long for something you'd lost, to fight against circumstances that seemed determined to defeat you, to refuse to surrender even when everything said you should. Maya understood all of that. She'd lived it. Every time she'd stayed up past midnight practicing scales while her father worked his night shift at the warehouse. Every time a teacher had suggested she focus on something more realistic than music. Every time someone had assumed she was less capable because of her secondhand clothes or her accent or the neighborhood she came from. All of that poured into her fingers now, into the keys, into the music that filled this beautiful old auditorium. She moved through the piece like she was telling a story. The quiet moments she played with such tenderness that you could hear the individual notes breathing. The dramatic passages she attacked with fierce intensity, her whole body swaying with the force of it. Her hands flew across the keyboard, left hand crossing over right, fingers stretching to reach those wide chord voicings that Rachmaninoff loved so much. The piano responded to every nuance of her touch, bringing out colors and textures she'd only been able to imagine on her digital keyboard at home. There was a section in the middle where the music pulled back, became almost fragile, just the right hand playing a simple melody, while the left hand provided gentle support. Maya played it like a memory, like something precious and distant. Her grandmother had always said that the quiet parts were the hardest. Anyone could play loud. It took real control, real musicianship to play soft and still be heard, to make silence as powerful as sound. Then the music built again. Slowly at first, then faster, more urgent. The chords came crashing down like waves, one after another, building toward the climax. Maya's fingers were moving so fast now that they blurred. Her arms ached. Her back was starting to hurt from the intensity of it. But she didn't let up. This was the moment the piece had been building toward. The moment when all that pain and longing and defiance came together in one powerful statement. She threw everything she had into those final cascading passages, the notes tumbling over each other like water over rocks. And then, suddenly, it was over. The final chord rang out, deep and resonant, filling every corner of the auditorium. Maya held it, her foot on the sustain pedal, letting the sound fade naturally rather than cutting it off. She sat perfectly still, her hands still resting on the keys, her eyes closed. She could feel her heart pounding, could feel the sweat on her back under her brother's old jacket. For a moment she forgot where she was. There was just the music, the last vibrations of that chord slowly fading into silence. When she finally opened her eyes and turned back toward the judges, she wasn't sure what she expected to see. Approval, maybe, or polite indifference, or that look she'd seen so many times before. The one that said, "Nice try, but not quite good enough." What she saw instead stopped her cold. All three judges were staring at her with expressions she couldn't quite name. Dean Hartwell had put down her pen and was leaning back in her chair. The younger judge was gripping the edge of the table with both hands. And Professor Volkov. His eyes were shining, actually shining, like there were tears in them that he wasn't bothering to hide. Nobody spoke. The silence stretched out, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15. Maya's confidence started to waver. Had she done something wrong? Missed a section? Made some terrible mistake she hadn't noticed? Her mind raced back through the performance, trying to identify where she'd failed. But she couldn't think of anything. It had felt right. It had felt like the best she'd ever played that piece, like the piano had been an extension of her own voice. Finally, Professor Volkov cleared his throat. His voice came out rough, like he was struggling to speak. "Where did you study?" It wasn't what Maya had expected him to ask. She straightened her shoulders, trying to project more confidence than she felt. "I haven't, sir. Not formally. My grandmother taught me the basics when I was young, and since then I've been teaching myself." The words sounded inadequate even as she said them. Teaching herself. Like she was some amateur who'd learned from YouTube videos. Which, to be fair, wasn't entirely untrue. Dean Hartwell leaned forward. "No private instructor? No preparatory program?" Maya shook her head. "No, ma'am. I practice at home on a digital keyboard, and sometimes I use the piano at my high school after classes when the music room isn't being used." The younger judge wrote something down quickly. Maya watched the pen move across the paper and wondered what she was writing. Probably something about how unprepared she was, how it showed in her technique, how she clearly didn't belong at an institution like this. But Professor Volkov wasn't writing anything. He was standing up now, his chair scraping against the floor with a sound that echoed in the quiet auditorium. He walked toward the stage, his movements slow and deliberate. When he reached the front, he stood there looking up at Maya, his weathered face intense. "In 40 years of teaching," he said, his Russian accent making each word feel weighted with importance, "I have heard perhaps 5 students play Rachmaninoff with true understanding. Most play the notes. They play them correctly, yes. All the right keys at the right time. Some even play with good technique. Clean fingering. Proper pedaling. Nice dynamics." He paused and Maya held her breath. "But very few," he continued, "very few play the soul. The longing, the rage, the refusal to surrender. You played all of that. You made me feel what Rachmaninoff felt when he wrote this piece. You made me remember why I fell in love with music 50 years ago." He studied her face like he was trying to solve a puzzle. "How? How does someone with no formal training, no expensive lessons, no prestigious mentors, how do you play with such understanding?" Maya didn't have to think about her answer. "Because I know what it feels like, sir. To be told you don't belong somewhere you know you're meant to be. To have doors closed in your face before you even get a chance to prove yourself. To love something so much that you'd give up everything else just for the chance to do it." Her voice was steady, but inside she was shaking. She'd just laid bare something deeply personal to 3 strangers who held her future in their hands. The other 2 judges were whispering to each other now, urgent and low. Dean Hartwell kept glancing between Professor Volkov and Maya, her expression unreadable. Finally, she motioned for Maya to step down from the stage. "Thank you, Miss Chen, that was quite a performance. We'll be in touch within 2 weeks with our decision regarding your application." It was a dismissal, polite but firm. The audition was over. Maya started to stand up from the piano bench, her legs feeling shaky underneath her. 2 weeks. They'd said 2 weeks. That was standard, she supposed. They probably had dozens more students to hear, scores to compare, decisions to make as a committee. She gathered herself, preparing to walk back down that long aisle, past those velvet seats, out into the waiting room where everyone had heard what that girl said to her. The thought made her stomach twist, but she'd faced worse than a room full of judgmental looks. But then Professor Volkov held up his hand. Just one hand, raised slightly, but the gesture stopped everyone. Dean Hartwell, who'd been shuffling her papers. The younger judge, who'd been capping her pen. Maya, who'd been about to step down from the stage. "A moment, please," the professor said, his accent turning the words into something formal and serious. He turned to face the other two judges, his back to Maya now. "I invoke my prerogative." Dean Hartwell's eyes went wide. Actually wide, like he'd just said something shocking. The younger judge looked confused, glancing between the dean and the professor with a question written all over her face. Dean Hartwell leaned over and whispered something to her, too quiet for Maya to hear. Whatever she said made the younger judge's eyebrows shoot up. She looked at Maya, then back at Professor Volkov, then at Maya again. The professor stood there waiting, his posture straight, his expression determined. Dean Hartwell set down her papers very carefully, like she was buying herself time to think. "Dmitri," she said, using his first name, "are you certain? You haven't used this in 7 years. Not since that boy from Boston, the one who's now playing with the Philadelphia Orchestra." Professor Volkov nodded once, sharp and definite. "I am certain. More certain than I was with him, if I am being honest." Dean Hartwell studied him for a long moment, then looked at Maya. Something in her expression had changed. Where there'd been professional neutrality before, now there was something that looked almost like respect. "Very well," Dean Hartwell said. She turned to face Maya fully, folding her hands on the table in front of her. "Miss Chen, Professor Volkov has just done something quite rare. As founding faculty of this conservatory, he has the authority to offer immediate acceptance to 1 student per year, along with a full scholarship and placement in his private studio. He hasn't exercised this privilege in a very long time." She paused, and Maya's brain was still trying to process the words. Immediate acceptance. Full scholarship. They felt like words from a foreign language she didn't quite speak. Professor Volkov turned back around to face her. He descended the few steps from the judge's table and walked right up to the stage, standing close enough now that Maya could see the lines around his eyes, the gray stubble on his jaw, the intensity in his gaze that was somehow both fierce and kind. "Miss Chen," he said, his voice softer now but no less serious, "I am offering you acceptance to Riverside Conservatory, a full scholarship that will cover your tuition and fees, and a place in my private studio. I will teach you myself." The words hit Maya like a physical thing. She actually took a step backward, her hand reaching out to grip the piano for balance. What? It was all she could manage. Her mind was spinning, trying to catch up with what was happening. This didn't make sense. She'd come here expecting to maybe, if she was lucky, make it past the first round. She'd hoped that they might see potential in her, give her a chance to prove herself over time. But this, immediate acceptance. Professor Volkov's private studio. A full scholarship. It felt like something from a dream, the kind you wake up from and feel sad that it wasn't real. Professor Volkov's stern expression softened just slightly, the corners of his mouth turning up in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "You have raw genius, child. Not talent. Talent is common. I see talented students every day. But genius, true genius, the kind that cannot be taught, only refined, that is rare. It would be criminal to let that languish." He paused, and his expression grew serious again. "But I warn you, I will work you harder than you have ever worked. Natural ability is only the beginning. I will push you until you think you cannot be pushed further, and then I will push you more." Maya's hand was still gripping the edge of the piano. She was afraid to let go, afraid that without something solid to hold on to, she might actually fall over. "I don't know what to say," she managed, her voice coming out smaller than she'd intended. Professor Volkov nodded like he understood. "Say nothing now. Go home, tell your parents. Think about what this means. But know this, if you accept, your life will change. Music will no longer be something you do when you have time. It will be everything. It will demand everything." Dean Hartwell stood up from the table, smoothing down her jacket. "We'll need you to come back tomorrow to sign paperwork and discuss the scholarship details. Bring your parents if you'd like." She walked around the table and approached Maya, extending her hand. Maya shook it, still feeling like she was moving through water, like everything was happening in slow motion. That was truly remarkable playing, Miss Chen. I look forward to watching your development here. The younger judge came over too, introducing herself as Professor Williams. I teach music theory here, she said, shaking Maya's hand with enthusiasm. I have to say your interpretation of that piece was extraordinary. The way you handled the transitions, the emotional depth. I'm excited to have you joining us. Maya thanked her, though the words felt automatic. Her brain was still trying to process what had just happened. 5 minutes ago, she'd thought she was being dismissed. Now she had a full scholarship and one of the most respected teachers in the country, offering to mentor her personally. Professor Volkov escorted her back down the aisle toward the auditorium doors. As they walked, he spoke quietly. You remind me of myself many years ago. I grew up in Soviet Russia, in a small town where most people became factory workers or farmers. But I loved piano. I practiced on an old instrument in my school. Broken keys, missing strings. When I finally auditioned for the Moscow Conservatory, they almost turned me away before I played a single note. Wrong clothes, wrong background, wrong everything. He glanced at her. But music does not care about these things. Music asks only, can you tell the truth? Can you make people feel? You can. They reached the doors and Professor Volkov pulled them open. The sound from the waiting room rushed in. Conversations, nervous laughter, the shuffle of papers and bags. Maya took a breath, steeling herself for what came next. But before she could step through, the professor touched her arm gently. One more thing, he said. There will always be people who think you do not belong. In my experience, these are the people who are most afraid that you do. Remember that. Then she was through the doors and back in the waiting room, and the change was immediate. The conversations didn't just quiet down. They stopped. Completely. Every single person in that room turned to look at her. It was so silent you could have heard a pin drop on the carpet. Maya stood there for a second, taking it in. The blonde girl who told her she didn't belong was sitting on the same couch, but her face had gone pale. Her friend was staring at the floor like it was the most interesting thing in the world. The boy in the expensive suit was looking at his parents with an expression somewhere between confusion and disbelief. Maya realized that they'd heard. Of course they'd heard. Professor Volkov hadn't exactly been quiet, and sound carried in this building. A woman sitting near the auditorium doors, one of the mothers, was looking at Maya with open curiosity. A man in the corner, probably someone's private instructor based on the way he was dressed, had his phone out like he'd been about to text someone and forgot mid-motion. Everyone knew. Everyone knew that the girl in the second-hand jacket with the cracked phone screen had just been offered something that almost never happened. Maya didn't know what to do. Should she say something? Acknowledge them somehow? In the end, she decided to do what felt most natural. She simply walked toward the exit, her head held high, her steps steady and sure. She didn't make eye contact with the blonde girl. She didn't look at the boy in the suit or his hovering parents. She didn't owe them anything. Not an explanation. Not a moment of her time, not a single thought. She'd let the music speak for her, just like her grandmother had always said. And apparently, it had spoken loudly enough. She was almost to the doors that led out to the main lobby when she heard Professor Volkov's voice behind her. He'd stayed in the waiting room, she realized, probably to call the next student. But instead, he was addressing everyone there. Let this be a lesson, he said, his Russian accent giving the words extra weight. The music world is full of people who look the part. People who dress correctly, who say the right things, who have the right connections and the right last names. But music itself does not care about any of that. The room was absolutely silent. Nobody moved. Nobody even seemed to breathe. Music asks only one question, Professor Volkov continued. Can you tell the truth? Can you make people feel something real? Everything else, all the expensive clothes and fancy instruments and prestigious teachers, these things can help. But they cannot replace that one essential quality. They cannot replace soul. He paused, and Maya, standing by the door, felt her throat tighten with emotion. Today you have seen what real musicianship looks like. I suggest you think carefully about that. Maya pushed through the doors before she could hear anything else, before the tears that were threatening could actually fall. The lobby was quieter than the waiting room, just a few people scattered here and there. She found a bench near the windows and sat down hard, her legs finally giving out. Her hands were shaking, actually shaking, trembling like leaves in the wind. She stared at them, These hands that had just played the performance of her life and tried to make sense of what had just happened. Full scholarship. Private studio. Professor Volkov himself. She pulled out her phone to call her parents, but her hands were shaking too badly to dial. She just sat there holding the phone, staring at the cracked screen, trying to catch her breath. A woman walking by smiled at her, probably thinking she was just another nervous student. Maya smiled back weakly. If only she knew. Finally, her hand steadied enough to open her contacts. She found her mom's number, her thumb hovering over the call button. How was she even going to explain this? How could she put into words what had just happened? Her parents had supported her music, had saved and sacrificed so she could have that digital keyboard. But they'd always been realistic about it too. Her father had suggested she study business, keep music as a hobby. Her mother had worried about whether she could make a living as a musician. They loved her, supported her, but they'd also been preparing her for the possibility that this dream might not work out. And now she got to tell them it had. Not just worked out, but exceeded every hope she'd ever had. She pressed the call button and lifted the phone to her ear, listening to it ring once, twice, 3 times. When her mother answered, her voice bright and questioning, Maya opened her mouth to speak and found that the words came easier than she'd expected. "Mom," she said. And despite everything, despite the intensity of the last hour, she found herself smiling. "You're not going to believe what just happened," Maya's mother had screamed. Actually screamed right there on the phone, loud enough that Maya had to pull it away from her ear. Then there was fumbling, muffled voices, and her father came on the line, his voice tight with concern, asking if everything was okay. When Maya explained again, slower this time, there was a long silence. Then her father, who rarely showed emotion, who'd worked double shifts for years without complaint, who'd taught her that hard work was its own reward, said in a voice thick with tears, "I am so proud of you, my daughter, so very proud." They'd talked for almost 20 minutes, right there in the conservatory lobby. Her mother wanted every detail. What did the judges look like? What did they say exactly? How many other students got this scholarship? Her father kept asking practical questions about the paperwork, the timeline, what this meant for her senior year of high school. Maya answered as best she could, still feeling like she was floating somewhere outside her body, watching all of this happen to someone else. When she finally hung up, she noticed someone standing a few feet away, the blonde girl from the waiting room. She was just standing there, arms wrapped around herself, looking uncomfortable and uncertain. When she saw that Maya had noticed her, she flinched slightly, like she was expecting anger or a confrontation. Maya just looked at her, waiting. If this girl had something to say, she could say it. Maya wasn't going to make it easy for her. The girl took a hesitant step closer. And she started, then stopped. "Tried again. I wanted to apologize. What I said to you before about not belonging here, about the community center, it was cruel, and stupid, and wrong." Her voice was quiet, nothing like the confident tone she'd had earlier when she was surrounded by her friends and her expensive clothes, and her certainty that she was better than everyone else. "I'm sorry." Maya studied her for a moment. The girl looked genuinely uncomfortable, shifting from foot to foot, unable to meet Maya's eyes for more than a second at a time. There was a part of Maya that wanted to say something cutting, something that would make this girl feel as small as she'd tried to make Maya feel. But what would be the point? Maya had already proven everything she needed to prove, and not to this girl, but to herself. "Yeah," Maya said finally. "It was cruel, but thank you for apologizing." The girl nodded, relief washing over her face. She hesitated, like she wanted to say something else. "You were amazing in there," she said, the words coming out in a rush. "I've been training since I was 4 years old. Private lessons twice a week, summer intensives, master classes with famous pianists, and I've never, not once, made anyone feel the way you made that room feel. When you played, it was like..." She trailed off, searching for words. It was like the piano was telling a story that everyone understood, even if they'd never heard it before. Maya felt some of the hardness in her chest soften. This girl was trying, really trying, to make amends, and there was something in her voice that sounded like genuine admiration, mixed with something else. Envy maybe, but not the bitter kind. The kind that comes when you see someone doing something you wish you could do, and you know that no amount of money or lessons or opportunities can buy what they have. "Thank you," Maya said, and meant it. "That means a lot." The girl gave her a small smile, still awkward but more genuine now. "I'm Lauren, by the way." She held out her hand and Maya shook it. "Maya." They stood there for another moment, the silence less uncomfortable now. Then Lauren glanced back toward the waiting room. I should get back. My audition is in 20 minutes and I'm completely terrified now. She laughed, but there was real nervousness in it. Good luck, Maya said. I mean it. Lauren nodded, gave her one more grateful look, and headed back toward the waiting room. Maya sat back down on the bench, her phone still in her hand. She pulled up the web browser and searched for Professor Volkov, wanting to know more about the man who'd just changed her life. The results were overwhelming. Pages and pages of articles, videos, interviews. He'd performed at Carnegie Hall, the Royal Albert Hall, the Sydney Opera House. He'd recorded albums that won international awards. He'd taught students who went on to become soloists with major orchestras around the world. And he'd chosen her, Maya Chen, from a 2-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood where gunshots sometimes woke you up at night. Her, with her digital keyboard and her self-taught technique and her grandmother's old lessons. She watched a video of him performing, recorded maybe 20 years ago, based on how much younger he looked. He was playing the same Rachmaninoff piece she'd just performed, and it was transcendent. Every note perfect, every phrase shaped with such care and intention that it felt like he was speaking directly to your soul. Maya watched with her earbuds in, completely absorbed, and understood suddenly why he'd connected with her performance. He played the same way she did. Not just technically, though his technique was flawless, but emotionally, like the music mattered more than anything else in the world. Time passed in a strange blur. Other students came and went from the waiting room, called for their auditions, returned looking relieved or disappointed or shell-shocked. Maya sat in her corner of the lobby, still processing, still half convinced she'd wake up and find out this had all been an elaborate dream. Around 3 in the afternoon, she saw Lauren emerge from the waiting room, her face flushed. She spotted Maya and came over, dropping onto the bench beside her with a heavy sigh. Well, I definitely didn't get what you got, Lauren said, but she was smiling. But they said I played well and to expect a decision in 2 weeks. So that's something. She looked at Maya. What are you still doing here? If I'd just gotten accepted with a full scholarship, I'd be out celebrating or something. Maya shrugged. I guess I'm still trying to believe it's real. And I need to go back tomorrow to sign paperwork anyway. Figured I'd walk around, get familiar with the place. Lauren nodded, understanding in her eyes. Want some company? I've been coming here for summer programs since I was 10. I can show you around. Maya hesitated for just a second, then nodded. Why not? Maybe this was part of the new chapter too, building bridges instead of walls. They spent the next hour wandering the conservatory grounds. Lauren showed her the practice rooms, small soundproofed spaces with upright pianos where students could work on their pieces. She pointed out the cafeteria, the library with its extensive collection of sheet music and recordings, the outdoor courtyard where students gathered between classes. That building there, Lauren said, pointing to a smaller structure set apart from the main building. That's where Professor Volkov's studio is. Only his private students get to work in there. It has 3 concert grands and supposedly the acoustics are perfect. She glanced at Maya. You'll be spending a lot of time there, I guess. There was envy in her voice, but it wasn't mean, just honest. Maya looked at the building, trying to imagine herself walking through those doors every day, studying with a master, becoming the kind of musician she'd only dreamed about being. They ended up sitting on a bench in the courtyard, watching the afternoon light filter through the trees. Can I ask you something? Lauren said after a while. How did you do it? How did you learn to play like that without formal training? Maya thought about it, trying to put into words something she'd never really analyzed before. I think when you don't have all the advantages, when you can't afford the best teachers or the best instruments, you have to find other ways to learn. You listen more carefully. You think more deeply about what the music is trying to say, not just how to play the notes correctly. She continued, the words coming easier now. And maybe, I don't know, maybe there's something about wanting something so badly that you're willing to work for it every single day, even when nobody's watching, even when you're not sure it'll ever pay off. That hunger, that desperation almost, it changes how you approach the music. You're not playing because it's what you're supposed to do or because your parents signed you up for lessons. You're playing because you'll die if you don't. Lauren was quiet for a long moment, absorbing that. I've never thought of it that way, she said finally. I've always just played because it was expected. My mom was a pianist, my grandmother too. It's what our family does. but I've never felt that kind of desperation about it. She looked at Maya. Maybe that's why I'll never play the way you do. I've had every advantage, but I've never had that fire. Maya shook her head. It's not too late to find it. The fire, I mean. You just have to figure out why you're doing this. If it's just because it's expected, then yeah, it'll always feel like an obligation. But if you can find your own reason, something that's yours and nobody else's, then everything changes. Lauren smiled, a real smile this time, not the practice one from earlier. Thanks, I'll think about that. As the afternoon shifted toward evening, Maya knew she should head home. Her parents would be cooking a special dinner, probably inviting her aunt and uncle to celebrate. Her younger brother would want to hear every detail. But she sat there a little longer, looking at the conservatory buildings, at the students walking past with their instrument cases, at the trees swaying gently in the breeze. This was going to be her world now, not just a dream she chased in stolen hours after school and work. Her actual life. Lauren stood up, checking her phone. I should go. My mom's been texting me for the past hour. She looked down at Maya. I'm really glad you're going to be here. I think you're going to shake things up in the best way possible. And hey, maybe you'll inspire the rest of us to remember why we started playing in the first place. They exchanged numbers, promising to stay in touch. As Maya watched Lauren walk away, she felt something shift inside her. She'd come here today expecting to fight for her place, expecting to prove herself to people who'd already decided she wasn't good enough. What she hadn't expected was to find that her place had been waiting for her all along. That her voice, her specific way of seeing and feeling and expressing music was exactly what someone had been listening for. Professor Volkov had heard it. He'd recognized something in her playing that went beyond technique or training. He'd heard the truth in it. The raw honesty of someone who played not because they were taught to, but because they had to. Maya pulled out her phone one more time, looking at the picture on her lock screen. It was old, taken almost 10 years ago. Her grandmother at her piano in Taiwan. Young Maya sitting beside her on the bench, both of them smiling at the camera. Her grandmother had died not long after that photo was taken, but she'd planted something in Maya that had never stopped growing. A love of music, yes, but more than that. A belief that music could transform you, could lift you out of whatever circumstances you were born into and carry you somewhere better. She touched the screen gently, a gesture that had become a kind of ritual over the years. We did it, Grandma, she whispered. We really did it. Then she stood up, shouldered her backpack, and started the walk to the bus stop. Tomorrow she'd come back and sign the papers that would officially make her a student at Riverside Conservatory. Tomorrow her new life would begin. But today, right now, she let herself simply feel grateful. Grateful for every obstacle that had made her stronger. Every doubt that had made her more determined. Every person who'd underestimated her and given her something to prove. All of it had led to this moment, to this place, to this impossible dream finally coming true. The bus ride home felt longer than usual, even though it was the same route Maya had taken 1,000 times before. She pressed her forehead against the window, watching the city roll by. Fancy neighborhoods with their manicured lawns gradually gave way to more modest areas. Then to the street she knew by heart, the corner store where she bought snacks after school, the laundromat where her mom spent Saturday mornings, the park where kids played basketball until the streetlights came on. This was her world, and in some ways it always would be. But now there was another world opening up, too. One she'd glimpsed today behind those conservatory doors. When she finally climbed the 3 flights of stairs to her family's apartment, she could smell cooking from halfway down the hall. Something special, definitely. Her mom only made her famous dumplings for celebrations. Maya's hand trembled slightly as she turned the key in the lock. The door swung open and she was immediately engulfed in noise and warmth. Her little brother Tommy launched himself at her, wrapping his arms around her waist. Mom says you're going to be famous, he shouted, his voice muffled against her jacket. Her mother appeared in the doorway to the kitchen, apron on, flour on her hands, tears streaming down her face. She didn't even bother wiping them away. She just stood there looking at Maya like she was seeing her for the first time, like the daughter who'd left that morning had come back transformed into something more, something brighter. Come here, her mother said in Mandarin, her voice breaking. Maya went to her, and her mother pulled her into a tight hug, flower and all. whispering things in her ear that were half words and half sobs. Her father emerged from the bedroom, still in his work uniform from his day shift at the warehouse. He must have rushed home early. He never left work early. But there he was, his weathered face breaking into a smile so wide it looked like it might crack. He didn't say anything at first, just joined the hug, wrapping his arms around both his wife and daughter. Tommy wiggled his way in too, and for a moment they just stood there in the small entryway of their small apartment, holding each other like they were the only people in the world who mattered. The evening passed in a blur of celebration. Her aunt and uncle arrived with a cake from the Asian bakery downtown, the kind with fresh fruit and light cream that Maya had loved since childhood. Neighbors stopped by after hearing the news, bringing food and congratulations and disbelief that someone from their building was going to study at the famous Riverside Conservatory. Mrs. Wong from downstairs, who'd complained about Maya's practicing more times than anyone could count, showed up with a red envelope. "For good luck," she said, pressing it into Maya's hands. "I always knew that noise would amount to something." They ate until they couldn't eat anymore, gathered around the small dining table that her father had to extend with a folding piece to fit everyone. Tommy kept asking Maya to explain everything again, wanting every detail about the auditorium, the judges, the moment Professor Volkov made his offer. Her uncle, who played guitar in a wedding band on weekends, wanted to know all about the professor's background, nodding appreciatively as Maya told him about the videos she'd watched. "You learn from the best now," he said, raising his glass of tea. "You make all of us proud." But it was later, after everyone had left and Tommy had fallen asleep on the couch, that Maya had the conversation she'd been both looking forward to and dreading. Her parents sat with her at the kitchen table, the celebration mess cleaned up, the apartment quiet again. Her father poured tea for all three of them, the ritual simple and familiar. "Tell us what you're feeling," her mother said softly. "Not what happened today. We heard that story 5 times already. Tell us what's in your heart." Maya wrapped her hands around the warm teacup, staring into it like it might have answers. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Everyone at that place today, they've been training their whole lives. They have private teachers and expensive instruments, and they've been performing since they were little kids. What if I can't keep up? What if Professor Volkov realizes he made a mistake?" Her voice got smaller. "What if I don't actually belong there?" Her father reached across the table and covered her hand with his. His palm was rough, calloused from years of manual labor, from lifting boxes and loading trucks so his family could have a better life. "You know what I think about when I go to work every day?" he asked. Maya shook her head. "I think about how I came to this country with nothing. I couldn't speak English. I had no education beyond high school. I had to take whatever job would hire me. And every single person at that warehouse, they looked at me and thought I didn't belong. Too foreign, too different, too uneducated." He paused, taking a sip of his tea. "But you know what I learned? The people who say you don't belong, they say it because they're afraid. They're afraid that if you succeed, it proves that all their advantages don't matter as much as they thought. That maybe hard work and determination and talent matter more than money or connections or having the right last name. You scare them, Maya. That's why they try to make you feel small." Her mother nodded, adding her own thoughts. "When I was your age in Taiwan, I wanted to go to university. My parents said no. Girls didn't need education, they said. I should learn to cook and find a good husband. But I studied anyway late at night when everyone was sleeping. I took the entrance exam without telling anyone. And when I got accepted, they said I was being selfish, that I was abandoning my family duties." She smiled, but there was old pain in it. "I went anyway. And you know what? It was the best decision I ever made. It taught me that I could be more than what other people expected." Maya felt tears starting to build behind her eyes. "I just don't want to disappoint you. You've both sacrificed so much for me and Tommy. What if I fail?" Her mother reached out and gently lifted Maya's chin so their eyes met. "You could never disappoint us, never. Even if you decided tomorrow that you didn't want to play piano anymore, that you wanted to do something completely different, we would support you. Because we're not proud of you for getting into that school. We're proud of you for being brave enough to try, for working hard when it would have been easier to give up, for believing in yourself even when the world told you not to." Her father stood up and walked to the small shelf where they kept important papers and family photos. He pulled out an old envelope yellowed with age and brought it back to the table. "This is the first letter I wrote to your mother when we were dating. before we got married. I was working in Taipei then. She was studying in Kaohsiung. We couldn't afford phone calls, so we wrote letters. He opened it carefully like it might fall apart. Listen to what I wrote to her. I may not be rich. I may not be educated like your university friends. But I promise you this. I will work every day to give our future children opportunities we never had. I will make sure they never have to choose between their dreams and their responsibilities. He folded the letter back up, his eyes misty. Tomorrow, when you go back to that conservatory to sign those papers, you're not just fulfilling your dream. You're fulfilling mine too. You're the reason I came to this country. You're the reason I worked those long shifts. You're the reason every single sacrifice was worth it. Maya couldn't hold back the tears anymore. They spilled down her cheeks and she didn't bother wiping them away. Her parents got up and wrapped her in another hug, and they stood there in the quiet kitchen, holding each other as the city hummed outside their windows. That night, Maya lay in her small bed staring at the ceiling. Through the thin walls, she could hear her parents getting ready for sleep. Tommy's soft snoring from the living room couch that doubled as his bed. This apartment had been her whole world for so long. These walls had witnessed every practice session, every frustration when she couldn't get a piece right, every small victory when something finally clicked. The ceiling had heard every dream she'd whispered into the darkness, every doubt, every hope. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow she'd walk back into Riverside Conservatory, not as an outsider trying to prove herself, but as a student who belonged there. She'd sign papers that would change the trajectory of her entire life. She'd start down a path that would be harder than anything she'd done before, but also more rewarding. Professor Volkov had warned her that he would push her beyond her limits. She believed him, but she also believed that she could rise to meet that challenge. She thought about all the people who'd been part of her journey. Her grandmother, whose wrinkled hands had first shown her where to place her fingers on the keys. Her parents, who'd worked themselves to exhaustion so she could have opportunities they'd never had. Her high school music teacher, who'd let her stay after school to practice on the ancient upright. Even the neighbors who'd complained about the noise, because their complaints had taught her to be efficient with her practice time, to make every minute count. And she thought about the people she'd met today. Professor Volkov, who'd seen past her worn clothes and self-taught technique to recognize something worth nurturing. Lauren, who'd started the day as an adversary but ended it as a friend. The other judges who'd witnessed her performance and understood that she had something special. All of them were part of her story now, threads woven into the fabric of who she was becoming. Maya rolled over and looked at the small keyboard set up in the corner of her room. It had served her well, this modest instrument that had been her portal into the world of music. Tomorrow she'd be playing on concert grands, working in soundproofed practice rooms, studying with one of the greatest pianists alive. But she'd never forget where she started. She'd never forget what it felt like to want something so desperately that you'd practice until your fingers hurt, to dream so big that people thought you were crazy, to keep going even when every logical voice said to give up. Because that was the real lesson, wasn't it? It wasn't about the expensive instruments or the prestigious teachers or the fancy concert halls. Those things helped, sure, but they weren't what made music matter. What made music matter was the truth you brought to it, the piece of your soul you were willing to share, the courage to stand up and say, "This is who I am," even when you were terrified that nobody would listen. Maya smiled in the darkness, feeling something settle inside her. Peace, maybe, or certainty. She belonged at Riverside Conservatory not because Professor Volkov had offered her a scholarship, but because she'd earned her place there through years of dedication and passion and refusal to accept limits that other people tried to impose on her. She belonged there because music had chosen her just as much as she'd chosen it. And tomorrow, when she signed those papers, she'd be acknowledging something she'd known in her heart all along. She closed her eyes, letting sleep begin to pull her under. Tomorrow would be the first day of the rest of her life. But tonight, she was still just Maya Chen from a 2-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood most people overlooked. Maya Chen, who'd learned piano from her grandmother. Maya Chen, who'd played on a digital keyboard while her neighbors complained. Maya Chen, who'd walked into an audition knowing she looked different from everyone else but played anyway. Maya Chen, who'd proven that where you come from doesn't determine where you're going. And that Maya Chen, she thought as sleep finally claimed her, that Maya Chen was going to be just fine.